Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast!
So first, I'm obviously gonna address the scammers and essentially what they do to scam people on the internet and how exactly it works. So essentially, there was a massive problem where people were essentially copying Mr. Beast's profile picture and basically just copying a comment or basically leaving a simple reply such as, "We can agree that this person never disappoints with our content." Basically just spamming that one sentence over and over again. Now, obviously this is spam. YouTube has taken action against this issue. Now, essentially, what the problem with these channels were is that they were basically essentially having this one video that would link people to their Discord server. Now, the problem with this is they were basically having a business where they were charging people actual money to essentially give them subscribers for their channel. Now, I don't think I need to explain why this is a terrible thing. Not only do they extremely ruin this person's channel by giving them dead subscribers who will never watch or engage with any of their new content, it essentially shows YouTube that, oh, this is blatantly sub-botted, so YouTube's gonna start immediately removing the subscribers. So essentially, you're back where you started, but you spent all the money. And the most ironic part is, if you're wondering if anyone actually falls for this trick, well, Mr. Beast himself, when he was a smaller channel and he was first creating his YouTube grind, he essentially fell for the sub for sub bait and essentially did this as well.
I realized sub for sub's not a good idea. I realized all the time I wasted on it.
Because most of these websites are extremely manipulative and target really young kids, like young demographics, and usually people who are beginners to the algorithm. Because obviously, when you're young and you're a beginner on the algorithm, you're not going to understand how a video blows up, how something does well, and why other things aren't working. You're not going to understand that. So essentially, that's how this trick works. The most ironic part is these people try and copy Mr. Beast and impersonate him so much, but all they do is copy every single terrible part about him. They spam comment sections, they spam the YouTube feed, they buy subscribers and gain fake engagement towards their channels and other people alike. It's literally every single thing that Mr. Beast would go back in the past to essentially tell his 12-year-old self not to do when starting a YouTube channel. Alright, let's move on to the next part of the iceberg. Scythe, the Mr. Beast impersonator and scammer. So essentially, for those who don't know the full story, Scythe is essentially the guy who basically started this multi-buying trend of essentially buying Mr. Beast profile pictures and spamming copied and half-assed comments, essentially doing it for clout chasing, exposure, and essentially to promote his scam business. What's really interesting is that a YouTuber named Jack Gordon actually interviewed Scythe, and let's be real, during the whole interview, Scythe gives one of the worst defenses I've ever seen in my life. I'll play some clips and I'll show you what exactly I mean.
I own 6 verified YouTube channels. I used to normally make content, but my channel got terminated 3 months ago because I was streaming the KSI Logan Paul fight.
Why do you think they terminated your channel? You illegally streamed copyrighted material.
What do we call that? I think everybody knows what we call that. We call that self-snitching.
I worked so hard for those 4K subscribers on that channel, so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna abuse the system.
You're lucky you didn't get sued. The amount of victim blaming and gaslighting that comes out of this man is insane. In 1 minute, he starts saying that he worked hard for the 4K subs, then somehow gets upset at YouTube headquarters for terminating his channel after he illegally streamed the KSI versus Logan Paul fight. Like, what did you expect was going to happen? Copyright is an insanely serious thing. You weren't even like accidentally doing it. You were knowingly streaming the event. Just because other people have streamed boxing events and haven't gotten caught doesn't mean you won't. It's such a stupid argument.
Okay, no matter what. I wanted a YouTube tag so badly, so I tried commenting everywhere on YouTube.
That's just sad, dude. Imagine buying a trophy that you didn't work for. You bought a channel, bought your subscribers, spammed copied comments, and didn't even gain a single subscriber organically. Okay, alright, here's your play button, buddy. You might as well have a participation award at this point. Alright, let's move on to the next part of the iceberg. The body, Mr. Beast copies. Given how in other countries, copyright law isn't as strongly and as regulated as it is here in America, I mean, let's be real here, if an entire Chinese anime corporation can basically copy the entirety of Gumball from Cartoon Network, basically copying the animation style, the buildup of the characters, and even the general general artwork, imagine how much cancerous it is for these countries in their content creator and social media influencer section. The amount of blatantly copied ideas, titles, thumbnails, and general content must be insane. It's no surprise that on social media and throughout the influencer network, given that of course YouTube will not promote content in different languages, especially if that person does not speak that specified language. There's actually a ton of MrBeast copies. There's an Indian MrBeast copy. Morgs at one point was copying MrBeast, and there was a Russian MrBeast, technically Belarus, so unfortunately his channel is still monetized and not restricted. Yes, unfortunate. Now, sadly, there unfortunately isn't really much that we as creators or YouTube can really do, but thankfully MrBeast has created different channels with multiple languages. So hopefully eventually the MrBeast Russia channel and the MrBeast Indian channel, if he decides to create one, will ultimately overtake the copies, because eventually once the MrBeast's Russian content gets pushed into the algorithm, people will start to realize, oh, this is just a blatant copy of this guy. So then they'll stop watching the copied work and they'll watch his content. So in a sense, I guess MrBeast solves his problem just by being famous. The Abyss, MrBeast Squid Game slander. Now, out of all the reasons to possibly clown / dislike MrBeast, this is probably one of the dumbest reasons I've seen so far. So when MrBeast decided to recreate Squid Game, people for some reason decided to give him a bunch of hate for it for no reason, and then one of the main reasons they kept bringing up was that it was quote-unquote a criticism against capitalism, which is extremely stupid and extremely flawed if they just did a little bit more research and just watched the entire video. Like, it's so easy to avoid this point. Squid Game is a criticism against not just capitalism, but also the representation and unfair treatment of minors within South Korea. Let me explain. The age of consent is 20 years old in Korea. One of the characters is 19. They, throughout episode 2, reveal that they have a son, which, by the way, would mean that it's underage teen birth. They then end up doing it with the mafia boss in the bathroom, which by this logic of her being 19 is illegal and technically predatory. So in a sense, Squid Game is a criticism against capitalism and child endangerment. The fact that these people couldn't do a morsel of research and figure this out is embarrassing. The final abyss, MrBeast shoutouts. Getting a shoutout from a channel that big is generally a pretty good and positive effect, but on the other side, there are eventually 3 main issues that can happen within the channel's growth. Essentially, what we need to understand is basically why exactly this can happen. Essentially, there are 3 different types of shoutouts, mainly within MrBeast's channel. There's the indirect shoutouts, the non-YouTube shoutouts, and the YouTube direct shoutouts. We'll start off with the indirect shoutouts, which are essentially the people who have their channels described in the giveaways at the end of the videos. People will then search up the channel, see the content on the channel, and if they like it, they'll subscribe. Obviously, this is a very harmless shout out because obviously the person who's subscribed doesn't really intend on necessarily growing their channel from this. They just want to subscribe and potentially win some money. That's all it is. Moving on to the next type of shout out, we're going to talk about the non-YouTube shout outs. People such as Ish13, Krusty, and Boy Jedi have managed to get the Discord related shoutouts. They get their videos plugged on the MrBeast Discord server, which obviously there's more than 40,000 members, so obviously getting plugged on a server like that is basically gold. So essentially it's a pretty good shoutout, and it's not as destructive as necessarily getting directly shouted out on a MrBeast main channel. I assume MrBeast did this mainly due to the fact that he wanted to test it out and see if, you know, what if I shout out random people out of nowhere and see how exactly they progress, and ultimately the results kind of speak for themselves. Now, ending it off with probably the last but most mysterious part is of course the MrBeast YouTube shoutouts. So mainly after the MrBeast Rewind, 3 channels such as NalterDeeds, Amelia, Birdie, and Soyan Osman were 3 lucky winners who ended up getting picked for this shoutout. Essentially then what happened was the 2 other their channels. Soyan, Osman, and Amelia and Birdie ended up quitting their channels. Amelia quit. Soyan has pretty much disappeared, probably because, let's be real, the channel is pretty much dead at this point. And Nalter has managed to actually make a comeback, and actually he's focused more on his second channel at this point, and yeah, he's doing pretty well. I think one of the main reasons why Zealous, the person who got the shout out by MrBeast, was so successful was because unlike the other 3 channels, they had a relatively small subscriber count when compared to him. Before the shout out, he actually had 50,000 subscribers and was Morjitsu's cameraman. So essentially, with that knowledge being set, if you've managed to get 50,000 subscribers and are a popular YouTuber's cameraman, there's generally something that you are doing that is probably correct. Ultimately, if anything, Isaiah Photo, the person who came in second and actually lost the MrBeast shoutout, the fact that he was able to overtake Zealous in actual sub count and views generally should show you that ultimately, regardless of shoutout or not, the algorithm is going to promote good content at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, you can't cheat the algorithm. No matter how many shoutouts or how much clout you suck off, at the end of the day, if the content you're making is trash, then all you're gonna get is trash results. If you're not making good content, they won't stay. So yeah, ultimately that's gonna conclude this video. SJW Iceberg coming out next. Apparently you guys want to see me roast some feminists, so alright, fine, let's do it. Peace.